Call this the Jack Posobiec Appreciation Hour. I can say confidently, I think Josh Shapiro would be the vice presidential nominee if it wasn't for Jack Posobiec. And that is, I'm being honest.
All right, folks, Jack Posobiec. We are back live, Human Events Daily, Real America's Voice here. I want to go back. We're on with Jonathan Alpert, the author of Therapy Nation. And we had this huge ruling, Jonathan, earlier today in the Tyler Robinson case, something that we've personally fought for very hard here on Human Events regarding cameras in the courtroom, that we want cameras in the courtroom. We've been demanding it. We've written letters about it. Tyler Robinson's defense team has referred to us in court by name because we have gone so hard calling for this and pulling up, precedent in court cases and all the rest. And they just lost. But I wanted to get into a little bit more the reasoning, perhaps, for why they don't want cameras in the courtroom. Because, you'd think that, hey, if you've got someone, and if your job is to show their innocence, or show that the state's case is full of holes, and you'd think you'd want the biggest audience possible for that. And so it brings me back to this image of Tyler Robinson, who from court in one of the earlier hearings, where he's leaning over, and guys, I think we have the still image of it as well. I know this is the video, but there's a still image that's a little bit better quality, and he looks like he is smirking and smug to his lawyer, to his legal team. And part of my theory is just my view, my opinion, is that they know that those things are incredibly damaging to this case because he doesn't seem to show any ounce of remorse at all. To me, he looks smug.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jack. I mean, he's got a smugness. I mean, that smirk says it all. He's demonstrated many times over that he can't control himself. And you have to wonder if the defense team is worried that that one smile or smirk could just change things dramatically for him. I'm no legal expert, but I do know a thing or two about psychology and how people think, and that could definitely change the narrative, the public narrative out there. But yeah, I mean, you're showing it now. He looks relaxed. He's got that smug look on his face, and that can't translate well to a winning case.
Well, and that's exactly right, because when you're looking at this from the perspective of someone that they're going to have to put in front of a jury, but also people that, of course, so these are the preliminary hearings. We won't have a jury yet, but the idea being that someone who's watching these or watching coverage of this may become a potential juror. I guess if you live in the Orem, Utah, or the Provost, Utah area, if you're in that district where the jury pool will be, and they know that every time this guy is shown on footage, he doesn't look like someone who's sad. He looks like someone, or at least sad about what happened, even if he's trying to show his innocence. He doesn't look like that. He looks like he's someone who's proud. He looks like he's someone who's condescending. I see someone who looks like they're smug. I see someone who looks like they're actually happy about what they did.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Luigi Mangione, very carefree. And like you said, he looks proud of what he did. He's probably convinced himself that it was his mission, his duty, and his responsibility to do what he did. And that's certainly what we've seen with Luigi. His manifesto supported that as well. And there's the other picture of Tyler. Carefree.
There's the one. That's exactly the one I was talking about. Yes, we got it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad the judge ruled the way that he did today. I think that bodes well for the state, and I'm sure Mrs. Kirk is pleased about that as well.
Yeah, no, I haven't. Well, look, I know that she has been advocating very publicly early on. One of her first interviews, this was the question that came up, and it was one of the very first things that she said, is that this should be done in public, that she wants cameras in the courtroom, that the whole country should see publicly this trial on full display, because it's something where, there's been people who have asked questions about it. There's people who want to know more about the evidence. What better way to do that? Show you have nothing to hide by putting it on TV. We saw that with Kyle Rittenhouse. We saw that with Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp at his whole trial, public. This has happened time and time again, where people, and it doesn't always mean the jury gets it right, but I think they will in this case. And I think that, we have a very clear case here of what happened. Daniel Penny, another example out of New York City. And so over and over, you can see these cases where they're put on camera, and it's something where the public can watch if they choose to actually see what happens.
Yeah, and you can also go way back to O.J. Simpson. I mean, that was on display for the world to see.
Yeah, no. Well, I see. I'm on the other side of that one. That's the one where I was thinking of where the jury didn't quite go the way that the evidence seemed to stack on that one. And but it was still something where we can still talk about it because it was on video, because we do have that record. And I do think that what the judge said here is that from the purpose of transparency, it's good to have this. People can react however they want. That's part of being in a free country. That's part of having the First Amendment. That's part of having freedom of speech. That's something that totally separates us from other countries. We were just, talking to someone who had just come back from Serbia, from Eastern Europe. Look, there's whole parts of the world that just don't have this system at all. And I think we should be we should not be cavalier about messing with our system, whether what side you're on or the other on one of these cases, because it's the best system that we've been able to come up with and the fairest system that we've been able to come up with.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And, the defense clearly is worried, and they fought so hard against this, and they lost. So, I think it just suggests that they are quite worried about things, and there's overwhelming evidence against their guy.
Do you think that, getting back to the therapy aspect, that, do you think that there's perhaps a therapeutic aspect towards, sort of the country as a whole, when you witness something as heinous and as evil and gruesome as the murder of Charlie Kirk, which of course everyone saw because of the nature of social media, by then having the trial itself be public, does that give a kind of therapeutic response, a kind of catharsis, if you will, for the public, so that they can see that there has been a response to the horror that they viewed?
Yeah, I do think it does. And I also think it allows for somewhat of a mental conclusion for people to process, because right now that image from that horrific day is so powerful in people's minds. So I think if we see this court case play out and we see justice served, then that will help people to process the trauma and, hopefully be able to move on to some degree.
I think so as well. Something from, just on a personal level, I people ask me, like, how do you deal with this kind of stuff? And I say, I actually, feel like the more information that I get about something, the more analysis that I'm able to do of something, it just helps me to compartmentalize it. It just helps me to be able to put something in its place, to understand that it's been dealt with. I understand that not everybody is like that, but I've always found that digging into the case, digging into the facts is something that I get a lot out of personally.
Yeah, and I think we've got an emotional response, but we're also responding logically, trying to understand the court proceedings. And we may never be able to reconcile emotionally, but at least we can watch this play out and see that justice is served, hopefully.
Amen. Thank you so much for that, Jonathan. Jonathan, tell us once again where the book is and where folks can get access to it.
Sure. The book is Therapy Nation, and it's available on Amazon and at most retailers. And you can find out more about me on X, Jonathan Alpert, and my website, jonathanalpert.com.
No, he's a great follow, folks. I mean, it's incredible. Personal responsibility, something that has been sorely lacking from the national discourse and certainly the therapy discourse for a long time. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, you have my permission to lay ashore. Jack Posobiec, we're back live, Human Events Daily, Real America's Voice. Now, this was a huge story on the left and in the media last week. It was the autopsy, the Democrat autopsy of 2024. We talked about on Thought Crime a little bit, if you guys watch Thought Crime. So we got into that. And One of the pieces that I think a lot of people were looking at was it's 192 pages and disclaimers all the way. But the fact was, if you remember, the document that leaked of the 192-page Democrat autopsy was actually sort of a draft document. It wasn't the finished document. So what did you see? You actually saw this. You saw this like margins where they have the comments and the argumentative tone and people going back and forth, not just on the revisions, but on the actual facts about what happened. And so our good friend Jonathan Alpert, the author of the new book Therapy Nation, which is just selling like crazy lately, he's joining us now. He's got a new op-ed out that's all about it because he wrote, and this is really interesting, the DNC's 192-page autopsy sounds like bad therapy. Jonathan, what do you mean by that? Why does it sound like bad therapy?
Yeah, it does remind me a lot of bad therapy. So if someone comes to see me, they're not just going to hear what they want to hear. I'm actually going to tell them, like, look, this is what's going on. It might be a little uncomfortable, but this is how you learn, this is how you grow, and this is how you improve. And when I was reading the reports of that DNC autopsy, it did remind me of bad therapy. You know, people unwilling to look at the hard truths and make improvements. And I've talked about how the Democratic Party, their whole messaging is about hating Trump, avoiding Trump, preventing Trump from ending the world. And that messaging just has not resonated with voters, and certainly not in the past election. And it does make me wonder what happens as we get into 2028 when Trump's not even running for office.
So in the sense then is the reason that it's bad there? I mean, it's definitely bad politics. So, and by the way, I'm not going to complain with them about that part of it. I certainly agree it's bad politics. But in the sense then where it's, you know, where you say it's bad therapy, because it talks about the fact that they're, you know, they have the tactical failures. They think it's a messaging issue. They're disconnected. They realize that they have a disconnect with working class voters. And I was actually on a show with a Democrat recently, and I said it was a friendly, you know, kind of back and forth. And I said, look, you know, it seems to be very clear that you guys realize that you have this disconnect with working class men, but also that you haven't quite figured out how to actually mend the gap. You just kind of put up these guys like Tim Walz or Graham Planter up in Maine as the latest example of this, where they're, you know, well, here's a rootin' tootin' gun totin' kind of guy, but ultimately they aren't the kind of person that actually has a connect. And the reason that perhaps it could be bad therapy is because there's no accountability involved.
Yeah, there's no accountability whatsoever, but there's also a complete lack of understanding of the electorate, the voters outside of the coastal elites. And, you know, it reminds me of 2016. I used to see a lot of patients who would tell me privately that they kind of like this guy, Trump, but they can never tell their spouse or their friends or their family members. These were blue collar workers who typically would go for the Democrat, but they were privately, secretly going for Trump. And I think at that time, the Democrats were in denial that no way could these people be voting for Trump. And that actually carried into the next election and the one after that as well. And they still seem to be in denial. It's almost like if you have a pathologist report from a medical examiner's office, and then you're just totally unwilling to look at the actual cause of death, and you go about living your life the way that you did and ignoring the facts. It's just not healthy for the Democratic Party. So I think there has to be a real reckoning within the party to make some progress.
And this is key, by the way. So what? Let's say the DNC is your client, right? And they're trying to connect with people in a relationship or in the workplace, but they're not willing to, as you know, the phrase is, like, do the work of actually confronting themselves, changing anything, taking accountability for anything. How do you get someone past that?
Yeah, and if they're just going into therapy or to see me and I tell them, look, this is what's going on and this is what I think you should do to try to make improvements, and they just come in every week and vent, they're going to stay exactly where they are. I would probably get them to open their eyes a bit and explain that their narrow view of the U.S. isn't working. They're not appealing to the mass of the population. They're really just doing what they've always done, which is appealing to the coastal elites. And it's not a winning formula. But it did remind me so much of that patient that would come in to therapy and just in denial about what's going on. On one hand, they recognize that they're anxious or they have other mental health issues, but it's almost like they want to remain stuck. It's defines them. They sometimes wear that as a badge of honor. And in some ways, I think that's what the Democratic Party is doing.
So, they might say that, something along the lines of, I guess, like, well, I imagine that it comes down to a refusal to, feel like they're coming to back off their principles or something like that. Oh, well, I'm not going to back off my principles, and I'm taking a principled stand. That's why I'm not going to come off of this. But you don't actually have to abandon your principles, to relate to people. Or that's number one. Number two is, I suppose sometimes you should actually re-examine your principles, shouldn't you?
Well, of course, and they should evolve. And just as the country has changed over the past 250 years, they should also adapt and evolve, and not be so rigidly fixed on these beliefs. It's not really helping their voters, is it?
No, it certainly isn't. And ultimately, it's something where, I remember this, seeing this in 2024 in real time. And I remember thinking, when and I'm just going to say it, I remember that they had a problem with Kamala Harris after she had made the switch with Joe Biden, and they had a problem with getting black male support for Kamala. And their response to this was they brought Barack Obama back out, and he started scolding them and nagging them and telling them that they needed to show up for their sister and that there was a problem with them if they didn't vote for their way. I remember looking at this thinking, this isn't how you reach out to someone at all. Ever.
Right. And you certainly don't lecture people. And, the
No.
Democratic Party was doing what they always did, and they were making it about identity politics. And again, there was just an assumption that if you're black, you must vote for the black candidate.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw overwhelming evidence to the contrary. It's just like therapy.
That's exactly
people
right.
People are being sorted into categories. You're black, so you must think this way. You're gay, you must face certain issues in the workplace. And therapists have a really bad habit of doing that. And I'm finding that people want to be treated with respect, and they want to be looked at as an individual and not just looked at a certain way because of their skin color or sexual preference. But the Democratic Party, as progressive as they like to come across, they do seem deeply rooted in and stuck in some old ways of thinking.
No, and that's exactly right. It's you have to treat people as individuals first and foremost, and don't come into a group and start, taking like every stereotype or every textbook, first glance at them and then start arguing for them that they should be doing something. No, it's if you've got a candidate, and I just know this from politics. If you got a candidate, you've got to tell people, hey, this person can make your life better, and here's how. Right? That's the goal. Right? That's the general goal with politics. It's you should do something because I said so. That ain't gonna work.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens tomorrow in LA with the mayoral race.
That's a great point, actually. Yeah, that's a very good point, because we got LA, you got Spencer Pratt. I've been looking at a little of those. It's kind of hard to read the tea leaves. Just the way they do elections is a bit strange. Of course, there've been a few irregularities, but you're exactly right. Here's a guy whose entire campaign is about issues. He's all he's talked about. He hasn't made this personal. He hasn't made this about identity. He's just made it about issues that are actually facing actual Angelenos. Now, the question is that something that is going to work in that political market, in that district? We'll see. I think we'll all see. But certainly, it's an incredible test run, and it's going to be an incredible test case to see. Right back, Jack Posobiec, Jonathan Alpert here, Real America's Voice, Human Events Daily.